Howdy folks, Spencer here, and today I want to go through and take a look at the stats of the upcoming Theseus Miracle Worker Destroyer. As always, chapters are listed down below for those of you that want to skip ahead. The first thing I want to quickly cover is where exactly does this thing originate from, because to most of you it probably doesn't look that familiar. Well, this originates from an IDW comic book, and if you want to learn more about that comic or about the lore behind the ship, I will have two links in the description down below. One to the announcement blog, which goes into some of the lore behind the ship, and also another link to the recent 10 Forward stream that we had on Tuesday, in which Kale and some of the other STO staff were interviewing the writers of that comic. So if you want to learn about the ship, about the lore behind it, and all that, again, those two links will be down in the description below. And now is the question that I know many of you want to know right off the bat, and that is, how do you get this ship in game? Well, unfortunately, the Theseus is an Infinity Lockbox ship. And what that means is that it is going to be pretty expensive to acquire. So if you're on PC, it will be added to the Infinity T6 Ship Choice Pack on June 28th, 2023. And I don't know if console's going to be getting it at the same time or sometime later. Console usually has a month or two delay on new ship releases, so don't be surprised if console doesn't get it right away. With this being a lockbox ship, you can gamble for it, which I would very much recommend against doing. It's always better to just sell the master keys and buy the thing that you're wanting to get. Trying to gamble in this game can be pretty brutal. I've shown on multiple streams where I opened boxes over on Tribble where I opened like $300 worth of boxes and didn't get a ship. So if you really want this ship, buy some master keys, sell them on the exchange, and you should be able to get this ship for probably 1.2 to 1.3 billion once the market settles. So just be patient and you will be able to get it with EC. Now, if you want to get this ship for free from the event campaign, it is important to note that the current event campaign that is running in 2023 will not have this ship as a potential reward. The event campaigns only give you options for ships that released in years prior to that event campaign. So the current one will not have this as an option, but future ones in 2024 and beyond will have this as an option if you want to get it via the event campaign. So if you want it this year, you're going to be paying, but if you want to get it for free, it will be an option in future years from future event campaigns. Heading over to the stats now, we have a Miracle Worker Destroyer here. So it does, of course, have the Destroyer Mastery Package, which is accuracy, crit D, crit chance, and then that 10% Cat 1 for energy weapons and torpedoes. This thing has a 5-2-1 weapon setup. It has 3 device slots, 1 universal console, 4 engineering, 2 science, and 5 tac. Those engineering consoles are actually really good right now, especially for an energy weapon build. That does enable the ship to run quite a few of the new ISOMAG engineering consoles for those of you that are interested in going down the ISOMAG route. The isomagnetic advanced engineering consoles are actually quite good when you stack a ton of them on a ship. The issue is that you can't use them at the same time as your Fleet Spire, Locator, and Exploiter consoles. So for most people, you're still going to be better off with the locators. But if you have a more premium build, I think that these ISOMAG consoles are really good, especially when you don't need the crit chance from the locators. These things have been really good for me in the runs that I've done so far, and eventually I will have a video out talking about them in more detail. Now, the other stats here, we have a hull modifier of 1.15, shield mod of 0.85, so overall the survivability on this ship is quite low. It has a base turn rate of 15, impulse modifier of 0.21, and an inertia rating of 60. So low defense, survivability stats, but it does have pretty good maneuverability here. And for the passive power bonuses that you get on the ship, you're getting 20 weapon power and 10 engine power. You're getting a little bit extra from this being a Miracle Worker ship. For the bridge officer setup, we have a commander tact with Miracle Worker, a lieutenant commander engineer with temporal operative, a lieutenant commander science, a lieutenant universal, and an ensign engineer. Now, I have a note here that the cryptic blog is messed up, and as of me recording this video at like 2 a.m., the blog is still messed up. So you can see here, right under the name of the ship, they say that it's got a commander tact with Miracle Worker, and then a lieutenant commander engineer with temporal operative. But if you look at the bridge officer stations down here, it's claiming that it's a dual Miracle Worker ship. But thankfully, on right up in the description up here, it details the correct specialization. And on the 10 forward stream, when they were showing this off, we did indeed see that it had a lieutenant commander engineer with temporal operative seating. So I think that this bridge officer seating is perfectly fine for an energy weapon platform. I would like to have seen one of these lieutenant commanders being a universal. As is, this ship doesn't have a ton of flexibility, which you're going to see when we get to the ship comparisons, that this thing, being a lockbox ship, should have at least another universal seat to allow you to change the build up a little bit more. So it is a bit disappointing to see that it only has that lieutenant universal there. And if we head over to the ship comparison, for which I'll be using Fleffel's sortable filterable ship list, which will also be linked in the description below, you're going to see that some of the comparable ships here, like the Vaadwaur Juggernaut, the Delkina, and even the Terran Hydra, which is a C-store ship, these ships all have, or mostly have, more flexibility. The Vaadwaur Juggernaut does not have basically any flexibility, but the Delkina and the Terran Hydra are ships from the past couple of years. The Hydra is even a C-store ship. And you can see here that even the Hydra, a C-store ship from just a couple months ago, has a more flexible bridge officer setup than the Theseus here. The Theseus has a total of 2, it has just that Lieutenant Universal bridge officer seat there, so it's got 2 ability slots that you can flex around, whereas both the Delkina and the Hydra have a lieutenant commander and an ensign seat that you can move around to whatever you want. So I'm not happy to see that the Theseus is a bit lacking on the flexibility side of things. Now, for the ship itself, it's Miracle Worker and Temporal Operative, and to be fair, there are not a lot of ships in this game that have that configuration. In fact, if I go and pop open the filter here, if I look for ships that have Miracle Worker and Temporal Operative, there's only 2 others in the game. Those 2 are the Terran Monitor, which was a science carrier from earlier this year in the anniversary bundle, and then the legendary Dederadex Miracle Worker Warbird Battlecruiser. So for this Miracle Worker Temp Op combo, the Theseus is the first tack ship to have that spec combo, but you can see that even compared to some of these other options, it doesn't have the same level of flexibility. That Terran Monitor was a $30 C-store ship that came out earlier this year, and even it got a Lieutenant Commander Universal there on that Temp Op seat. And the legendary Dederadex had a Lieutenant Universal and an Ensign Universal. So that lack of the lack of flexibility is really annoying, especially given the fact that this Theseus Miracle Worker Destroyer is going to cost more than the entire bundles that these 2 ships that have the Miracle Worker temp op config. The Theseus will cost more than what those bundles cost that those ships come from. So a bit annoying to see that it is not as good on the flexibility side of things. Survivability is a bit lower, like I talked about when going over the stats, and you can see that here. You compare it to even the Terran Hydra, which was also a destroyer. The Terran Hydra has a different spec combo, so it's not a direct comparison, but that is a destroyer that released just a couple months ago. That's got a commander and lieutenant commander spec combo on it. It's got more survivability, slightly less maneuverability than the Theseus, but again, it has more flexibility in its bridge officer layout tier. All of these ships are 5 forward weapons. The Vodawar Juggernaut gets rid of the experimental weapon and just gives you a 3rd aft weapon, whereas these other ones that I'm comparing against all have 2 aft weapons with an experimental. The Dalkina, the reason that I have that on here is because that is a platform that I have used quite extensively from the lockbox as a directed energy weapon platform. And I think those of you considering the Theseus might want to take a look at the Dalkina. The Dalkina doesn't have that Miracle Worker spec seat there. Instead, it's got a commander command and a lieutenant commander intel. But I think the Dalkina as an overall package is still better. It's more survivable. It's got basically identical maneuverability, but it also has a hangar bay and a battle cloak. It does have a singularity core, but I think that issue is highly overrated at this point in the game. You crank your weapons power to max, you dump the rest into engines, and if you're on an energy weapon platform, you just don't care about shield or aux power that much for most builds. Some builds will care about the aux power, but the point is, the singularity stuff I don't think is really that big of an issue nowadays. The Dalkina also has 4 engineering consoles, so it can do 4 of the ISO mags plus another in the universal slot. The Theseus in total can get 1 more ISO mag than the Dalkina, but the Dalkina has the ability to run override subsystem safeties, which stacks with the ISO mag consoles. And if I go in game here, you can see just me sitting here in space. I'm at 161 weapon power. Let me make this a bit bigger for you guys. Okay, so my Dalkina here, I'm at 161 weapon power. If I use override subsystem safeties 3, which apparently got deslotted on my ship for whatever reason, if I hit OSS 3, I'm over 200 weapon power. So I think that intel is really valuable alongside these ISOMAG consoles, and to me, the Theseus seems like it's designed to take advantage of the ISOMAG consoles, and while it will do that, I think you'd be better to synergize those ISOMAGs with a ship that can run an Intel seat for OSS. So if you're wanting to get a lockbox ship for a DO platform, the summary of what I'm saying is I think I'd go for the Dalkina. If you're wanting a C-store platform for energy weapons that, can dish out a ton of damage and is Federation themed, I think the Terran Hydra would be the one to go with. And fun fact, again, that's a C-store ship. It's also got a built-in cloak. It's just a normal cloak, but it would have been nice to have seen the Theseus with like a battle cloak, just to, give it a little bit of something, especially given that it's a lockbox tier ship. Now for raw firepower potential, I think the Vodwar Juggernaut is still the king of energy weapon DPS. It doesn't really have any flexibility with its bridge officer setup, but again, I think with the ISOMAG setups, the Vodwar Juggernaut can run as many ISOMAGs as the Theseus could, and it has Miracle Worker with Intel, which I think is just going to synergize better with the ISOMAGs over the Miracle Worker Temp Op combo that the Theseus has. So the Theseus isn't bad. It's just it has some very fierce competition here, and again, I think you can get most of the performance and probably a little bit more out of the Terran Hydra in the C store if you're just wanting a Federation energy weapon platform. Moving on to the console here. The console is the Brancher Crystal Fragments. This has passives for plus 20.1% Cat 1 beam damage and plus 5.3 weapon power. The tooltip here is that, or the clicky, is that it creates 3 Brancher Fragments that will deal kinetic damage, and upon colliding with the foe, each Brancher Fragment will create 2 small Brancher Fragments that will attempt to return to you. If the small fragments are able to return to you, you'll get a small beam weapon damage buff that is Cat 1 and can stack up to 12 times. And if a small branch returns to you, it will also lower the cooldown of the console, it appears. This console just is completely random, if I'm being perfectly honest. This is basically the mechanic of the crystalline entity. So if you're playing crystalline entity, you know how it shoots out those branches that chase at you and then they return to the entity once those have been destroyed. That's basically what this console is. Now, this console doesn't really look that good, and if I compare it to another recent ship that that I just did a video for, the free summer event ship, the console on this just really seems quite underwhelming. When we compare these side by side, like just look at the passive side of things here. The event console that we're getting off of the Hesperian ship there, that has passes for 20% Cat 2 for Disruptor and a bunch of other damage types. And then it gives plus 10 current and plus 5 max engine power. And here we have this lockbox ship console that has a 20% Cat 1 beam damage buff on it, and then just plus 5 weapon power. Just seems weird to me that the console here is, so underwhelming. For the Starship Trait, this is Ship of Theseus, and I don't think this trait's going to be that good, just based on what it is. The first issue with this trait is that it only works on Miracle Worker ships. And what this trait does is when you are activating abilities to trigger the innovation effect on Miracle Worker ships, you will get a buff corresponding to whatever bridge officer ability that you would hit to trigger that innovation. This is way too random. This is an extremely random trait. It can only stack up to 20 times total. I'm assuming that means that you're getting a total of 20 buffs from this. You're not getting 20 of each potential buff. If you could get 20 of each potential buff, then this would be interesting, but given that it says up to 20 total, and given the randomness of this, I have to say that I think this trait is something that you can very, very easily ignore. And then we have the experimental weapon, the Solar Voltaic Projector. This thing deals fire damage, has a 6-second recharge, and it has a proc on it, 10% chance when you fire it to give you 200% energy weapon firing cycle haste for 4 seconds. I think the issue here is that haste buff, it's 10% is fine, but remember, that's only, you're probably only going to get that once every minute, and that buff is only up for 4 seconds, so we'll have to wait and see how this experimental weapon performs. It looks interesting, but overall, like, these secondary items on the ship are a bit underwhelming, and like I'll talk about here in a few minutes, it does make me wonder if this ship was originally planned to be a C-store ship, and then they just decided to toss it into a lockbox because it's all over the place with the stuff it has, and it just, like the ship is good, but the rest of the things so far just have not been that appealing. And the Admiralty card, which I know many of you care about. 60 engineering, 29 science, 34 attack. That is interesting. And +8 engineering and science per in-ship. So my thoughts here, I'm going to do some pros and cons. The pros are that this is the first tack ship with a Miracle Worker Temp Op combo for specializations like that. The engineering console setup on this does allow you to do a full isomag setup if you want to play around with those consoles rather than the traditional locator or exploiter setups. It has good mobility stats. The bridge officer layout, while not being the most flexible, is still good enough for an energy weapon platform or a do-sci build for those of you that are into that. The experimental weapon might be interesting, but I suspect that over time we'll probably see that move over into the cons side for just not being good enough. So the cons here is, of course, this is a lockbox ship. It's extremely expensive to get, and as soon as you guys heard me say lockbox, I imagine a bunch of you immediately just were completely turned off of ever getting this ship. The trait and console on this look pretty mediocre. Honestly, they look subpar to even the event stuff that we just had announced on the event summer ship, the Hesperian. So quite bad when you have these two ships launching side by side, and the one that's going to cost like $100+ has traits and consoles that just don't seem to be at the same tier as the event ship stuff. So bit disappointing there. This ship has very low survivability stats on it, so you're gonna probably blow up a bit more than usual in this ship. And as I've mentioned before, the bridge officer setup does lack some flexibility, especially again when you compare it to some of these other ships out there. Like the Delkina is another lockbox ship that you can get from the same box that the Theseus is from. That has much more flexibility. And then the Terran Hydra and the Sea Store. Again, that's a $30 ship, and you get the Hydra on account-wide unlock. Theseus here is going to cost you over $100 most likely, and you're only going to get it for the one character. So the Hydra being cheaper and being more flexible with its setup really is not good for the Theseus here. So in conclusion, as you can tell, I'm recording this at 2 a.m. I'm very, very positive about this ship. The Theseus is a good ship. The ship itself is actually pretty good, but it's held back by Cryptic's monetization approach here. The fact that it's a lockbox ship basically makes it dead on arrival. When you're looking at ships at or around this price point, it is competing against some really good energy weapon platforms like the Delkina and the Vodwar Juggernaut. And the thing is, I think both the Delkina and the Vodwar Juggernaut are still going to be better than this ship. The fact is, Intel is still a really good specialization when it comes to energy weapon performance. And Temporal Operative is nice for recursive shearing and for low cooldown unconventional systems procs. But Intel has those low cooldown uncon procs also, and it also has OSS. So it's just really hard. And again, I've mentioned this a couple times, I do think that the Terran Hydra in the Sea Store is going to be a really good competitor to this ship. And I would go as far as to say that for some of you, even if you had this Theseus, I think the Terran Hydra from the Sea Store would probably still end up being the better ship for the majority of users. The secondary items on the ship don't really seem to be the most impressive. The experimental weapon looks the most promising, but a lot of experimental weapons look good when we initially see them, and then we get them and they end up performing quite poorly. So, with experimental weapons, just set your expectations as low as possible. Overall, I do recommend this ship to those of you that want a Federation Due platform and you have no budget limitations. But for those of you that do want to not spend $100 on a ship for a single character, I would recommend the Terran Hydra or the Bozeman, which also has a fleet version, the Fleet Soyuz. I think the Hydra in general is just a really good, just direct energy weapon platform. And the Bozeman or the Fleet Soyuz are really good right now if you're going with an ISO mag setup. The ISO mags are, again, pretty good. They're not going to be for everyone, and I'll be talking about them more here in a future video. But if you're in a situation where you've got a lot of crit chance on your build and you have a ship like the Bozeman and Soyuz or the Theseus here that has a ton of engineering consoles, then those ISO mags are very, very interesting to mess around with. So that's my breakdown of the ship. I know it's not the most polished video you guys have ever watched. I really am, like, I was impressed with the ship when I first saw it, and then everything just started, crashing as soon as we saw that it was a lockbox ship. So I wish Cryptic would change the monetization a little bit. I know they're not going to ever get rid of lockboxes. It makes them too much money. But I think if they could make the choice packs, the Infinity choice packs, just let us sell those directly on the exchange, that would help with the prices of these things. Because right now, every time you want to sell an Infinity T6 ship pack, you have to pick the ship that you want to sell and then post that. So every time they add a new ship in, it's diluting the pool and just hurting the supply on each of the individual ships. And I'd also like to see a guaranteed drop like what Neverwinter did. I don't know if there's been any progress from them on that, but that would be quite nice to see. But that's going to be it for this video. Thank you all for listening to my rambling here. And again, thank you all to all channel members and viewers for the continued support. More videos are coming soon. I've got a news video that will probably be out later today that I'll start working on when I get up. And hopefully I want to have my event campaign recommendations out either Friday or Saturday. So stay tuned for that if you've been wondering what ships you're going to be looking at. See you guys around.